You don't have to be an everyone pleaser. And in fact, if you are trying to please everyone, your dream clients aren't going to feel special. The guys who are, and the companies and the individuals and the businesses that are actually an amazing fit for your business can just feel just part of the crowd when you're trying to please everyone.
Welcome to Architecture Business Club, the show that helps you build a better business in architecture so you can enjoy more freedom, flexibility and fulfillment in what you do. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss another episode. We're joined by Daniel Patterson, a former RIBA Part 1 with nearly 2 decades of experience helping businesses grow and scale. He's the founder of Masterplan.pro and branding agency Highly, and has worked with RIBA and RSAW to deliver CPD training on business and marketing strategy. Daniel is also the creator of the Architect's Master Plan, a 12-month growth system for architects who want to escape the tender trap and run highly profitable sought-after practices. To discover how much profit your firm is missing out on each year, head to Masterplan.pro/profit gap and use Daniel's free Architect's Profit Gap tool. Daniel, welcome to Architecture Business Club.
John, it is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I've been looking forward to this one, Daniel. We've been talking about this a little bit over the last month or two, so I'm glad that we could make this happen today. Actually, on International Podcast Day, the day that this recording is taking place.
How about that? You've just hit 100 guests. It's International Podcast Day. Wow, this feels like quite the pleasure indeed, John. Thank you.
Absolutely. Daniel, before we get stuck into the topic that we've got today, could you tell me a little bit about what you like to do outside of work?
A lot of things, John. I'm a musician when I haven't got the drawing pad out or working on business plans, etc. But like yourself, you've got your guitar there, don't you? My drum kit was not in our house. That had to be. My wife threw me out for having a drum kit, so I've got more likely threw the drum kit out rather than me. Yeah, so music a big part of our life. I love just walking, John, going out for walks, exploring, adventuring. Any opportunity we get to travel, we'll take it as well. Bring on a bit of photography as well. We're in Formula 1 season as well. I gotta say, my dad was very much a petrol head. And those genes seem to pass on to me as well. So I can't get enough of motor racing either. So there's a lot going on outside of work, John. But I got to say, what I love to do the most is just spending quality time with the family. Yeah,
we've got a lot of shared interests there, Daniel, particularly in music. I bet your neighbours were glad when the drums got thrown out.
Do you know, I'm a bit of a purist as well. I'd rather have no drum kit than have an electric drum kit as well. A little bit controversial, perhaps. But yes, relegated the drum kit back to church and can only practice there now.
We'll keep at it though. Yeah, great hobbies to have, all of those. Daniel, we are going to talk about how to double your profit without hiring or spending more on marketing. This is a great topic. Really looking forward to this one. Why do you think so many firms struggle to stay profitable even when they're doing great work?
The big question, John, isn't it? In fact, profit doesn't seem to come up. Money doesn't come up a lot in the conversation. And yet, it's absolutely at the heart of the business, which it is, of course. Architects love to create. And, you know, it's what I wanted to do as well. It's what I went to university to do too. And the dream for most architects that I speak to is to create wonderful architecture. And the business side of things gets separated and set aside. And so the conversation of money doesn't come up. And yet that is the very tool and resource that's going to enable architects to put more time and resource into the projects that they love the most. And so why do architects not talk about it? Why do architects not bring it up? I don't really know. Comes across perhaps as taboo, John, to talk about money, a bit like the way marketing might sound like within the architecture space as well. It almost sounds and comes across as if I talk about money, I'm cheapening my own reputation. And to some degree, I understand that. I've got a lot of empathy for wanting to retain a measure of prestige and honor within the architecture, especially the chartered architecture space. But we have to recognize that it is, as I said, it's that pillar really for enabling the growth and enabling the types of conversation and creativity that architects want to roll with.
If we want to do that creative work and work on the types of projects that we really want to work on, then it's really fundamental that we're not ignoring money and we are profitable, because if we're not, then we're not going to be able to do the work that we want to do, to work with the types of clients we want to work with. It's so important that we bring this up and raise some attention around this topic about money and profit. What do you think it is that holds architects back from making more money?
John, I think it's 2 or 3 things. I've spoken to a lot of architects in the last year particularly, and as I'm sure you have as well, and for the listeners listening too, perhaps you can relate to a couple of these things, especially once you transition out of a solopreneur, a solo practitioner, into having multiple people working for you and building your business. Then there's an onus on the principal to keep those bums in the seats. There's an onus to keep families fed. And what ends up happening a lot of the time is there's a chase for money, not just general, but any money. And what happens is, from the architects that I've spoken to a lot, it's number one aim is to get on frameworks, it's to get on tender systems, it's to win the big projects, to keep the system running for the next 3 or 4 months perhaps. And the trouble with that comes with the second problem that comes up a lot, which is you end up competing with everybody, not just other architecture firms or chartered architecture firms. If you're chartered, you're competing with everybody who's wanting a piece of that pie. And so what ends up happening is there's a system that works for the client, which I don't think it actually works for ultimately, but there's a system that ends up happening where you've got one project and 10, 20 architecture firms competing for that one project. The winner isn't always going to be who delivers the best concept or who is, in theory, the best architect. The winner often comes down to a subjective relationship or price. And so it's a race to the bottom. And if you keep racing to the bottom within your business, and if everybody else is doing that, not only are you devaluing your industry, John, not yours specifically, but the architecture industry, you're devaluing the value of creativity. And you're saying it's not worth a lot. We just want to get the work, any work. And so profit ends up becoming completely exhausted. And we work at a just above break even scenario. So that's not a great situation to be in. That racing for tenders, racing to the bottom, and competing against people who are not at the same level of quality that you are just to get the work. Architects need to be brave, John. They need to be able to stand up. They need to be able to say, these are my prices. They need to be able to communicate their value much better than they currently are at the moment, relying on systems like frameworks to win work. There's another route to get there, and those other routes, John, are so much more profitable.
Yeah. That's a situation that you've described there. It must be so common for so many practices, and it can lead to, as you say, it can lead to eroding any potential profits and just scraping by, but also probably working on some projects that actually you're not really that interested or excited in either. So the work doesn't end up as fulfilling as it could be because you're not positioning yourself and going after the types of projects that you really want to work on. Yeah, sticky situation for some practices for sure. Bringing it back straight back to money though, why do you think so many people treat money like it's a dirty word? Like, a lot of people are really uncomfortable around money. Why do you think that is?
I could ask you the same question, John. I don't know. It perhaps comes down to a self-sense of virtue and credibility to not talk about money. When you see products that are on the shelves shouting about their price, generally speaking, they're of the lower value types of products. If you're going shopping in a high street, for example, However, if you end up going into I was trying to think of a very specific example, but perhaps somewhere Rolex in London, I would be surprised if they've got 200 products out, each with a little sticker tag on them. There's something about the idea that high value shouldn't need to talk about money. Now, and I think there is a measure of value and worth and understanding that talking about money publicly, there's a place to keep some things withheld in order to retain that level of brand authority. But within certain circles, within client conversations, we need to be better at understanding and talking about money and not shying away from it. In fact, a lot of our clients we would encourage to talk about money right at the beginning of conversation rather than waiting 2, 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe a day or two after discovery to come up with a concept before talking about money, just to recognize that the fit's not there and that the expectations are way off. And you've just wasted 2 or 3 days potentially of time and work, which could have been used as billable hours or seeking and searching for high value work. And so there's that, again, that spiral that we end up wasting a lot of time within this industry.
Also, that time wasting isn't just your time, it's also the prospective client, that prospect that you're having the conversation with. It could be completely wasting their time as well. And you could be so much misalignment, particularly, I think this is a particular problem with smaller practices that work with a lot of domestic clients, where if they've never done a home renovation project before and never worked with an architect before, then they may have no clue whatsoever, like even what ballpark that your fees are in. They may not know if your fee is £500, £5,000 or £50,000. So actually not even giving a range or a ballpark, I completely agree with you on that. I think that it's such an easy way to waste a ton of your time and also mess around that person as well. And actually having those upfront conversations at the beginning and just gauge things quickly, I think is very, very sensible thing to do, for sure.
This maybe actually feeds back into, John, something that I see a lot with architects, which is being a people pleaser. We don't want to disappoint clients. We don't want to go near the topics that are taboo or risky or could turn people away from potentially working with us or referring us. Whereas inadvertently, what you might have just done in the scenario you explained there, John, is you've wasted that client's time. And if you go back to old marketing speak, this is going back 20, 30 years perhaps, old marketing speak says a client generally needs to have 10 good experiences before they'll tell somebody. And on the flip side of that, if somebody has one bad experience, they might tell 10 people. That these days with social media, with the networks that we've got, that's no longer the case. One bad experience could reach hundreds of people. And so there's a sense of carried and measured risk in every conversation that if I get this conversation wrong, if I talk wrong, if I don't present myself in the right way, then, I could build a negative reputation for my brand. But actually by holding back on the crucial conversations, you're not just postponing the inevitable, you're wasting more time and therefore increasing frustration of that client. It'd be far better in that particular scenario to say, lovely to meet you. We typically operate for our domestic projects, operate within this range. Is this a good fit for you? Or can I help you find somebody else? So right away, yes, you've turned them down if they're not a good fit, but you're actually, in that instance, actually offering them an opportunity to be helpful, for you to be helpful and guide them and continue to guide them, even if it's away from your practice. And so you can maintain your reputation and maintain it within a bracket that your dream clients live for and can work within.
I love that approach, Daniel. I have tried something similar in the past when I was in architectural services and working on those types of projects with a lot of mainly domestic clients. What would happen is I'd actually managed to turn an inquiry that was not a good fit for me, somebody I couldn't help. I've on more than one occasion they've left a testimonial for my business, even though we didn't work together, just because when they got in touch and we had that initial conversation, we've quickly worked out that we weren't a fit, but I've managed to then direct them to another company, another provider, or just directed them to whatever piece of advice or whatever it was they needed to fix that problem that they had. And that's resulted in a review for the business from somebody that actually wasn't even a customer. Like, how great is that to be able to get testimonials and reviews from not just your actual customers, but from prospects that come in that aren't a good fit? Wasted opportunity, I think, isn't it, if you're not helpful in that way in those conversations?
That's a great example, John. That's brilliant. And I'm delighted that was the outcome for you. You knew your boundaries. You knew what would be a good fit for your business and what wouldn't be. And you were able to communicate that well. And that's something that we need to get better at doing, is understanding that there are ways to say no that don't end up in clients throwing dirt at our business. It's like playing ninja tactics, really, but it's not manipulation. It's simply understanding scope and being helpful. And you can be helpful even with firmer boundaries in place. You don't have to be an everyone pleaser. And in fact, if you are trying to please everyone, John, your dream clients aren't going to feel special. The guys who are, and the companies and the individuals and the businesses that are actually an amazing fit for your business can just feel just part of the crowd when you're trying to please everyone.
Yeah.
And so, big topic and perhaps another conversation to have, John, but price needs to be one of those boundaries that gets talked about early.
Absolutely. Just one final thing on that thought before we move on. I thought another thing that about maybe some of the people in architecture feel like money's a bit of a dirty word. I think often that as creatives that we can get very emotionally attached to our work. We can become very emotionally invested in it, particularly if you are running a practice where you are still on the tools, so to speak, if you are still actually working on those projects and doing some of that design work that you enjoy doing. That can be something where, because you can get really emotionally invested in it, when it comes to talking about money, you can take that, if they're not a good fit, or it can feel a bit like a rejection, that can feel personal because you're so closely tied and associated with your work. I think that's a particular problem for creatives, and also particularly for those smaller size companies where they're very hands-on with everything. They can feel like it's like the business and themselves are so intrinsically tied together that they're like one and the same. And then any kind of knockbacks, particularly around pricing conversations, you can end up taking it quite personally. I think if you can learn to separate that and not take it personally, then it does make it a lot easier, that actually just an acceptance that you're not going to be a good fit for everybody. And it's absolutely okay, because just because they're not a good fit for you, you're not a good fit for them, it doesn't mean that in the next conversation, you're not going to find somebody else that is a perfect match for you. Yeah.
I think, John, it's another good reason to talk about price right up the beginning, before you start investing emotionally in the relationship and in the design and in whatever's going to be produced. Having a really clear understanding at the beginning, is this a good fit for us or not? And by the way, that goes both ways, for you, but also for the client. You might not be a great fit for them. Let's figure that out straight away. And then dive in and invest emotionally into the project. It's interesting, John, and I might be diverting ever so slightly, but it is still related to the topic of price. There's an architect that I'm working with at the moment who had a referral, had a dream client knock on their door for a project. Great. They did not want to lose it, and they were willing to work a lot less just to get the work. This is before I was working with them, John, by the way. But what they ended up doing was doing about twice the amount of work for the client that they were really invested emotionally in, because they knew it might be a great piece for their portfolio. It might reflect the type of work that they want to do more of. And so they wanted to knock it out of the park and do a brilliant job. But the trouble with that is that they essentially ended up working for half the price. And you can't sustain a business doing that. We've got to be better at communicating value and communicating that value up front before we dive into the project. Shying away, reducing our prices in order to secure the deal isn't good enough for a quality service such as architecture. This is a massive investment for clients. Doesn't matter what client it is, it's a massive investment. And they need to feel like they're in good, safe hands. And a good way to do that is to charge a lot of money. It feels like when somebody's investing a lot of money, it's safe. If I was paying for eye surgery, John, I would feel a lot more secure and safe spending £10,000 on eye surgery than I would someone who offered it to me for £100. I would remortgage my house if I had to save my eyes. And it's the same with your homes or your property or investments. These are the biggest investments of your life or your business potentially. And so we need not shy away from the idea that expensive is a dirty word. No, what it's doing is it's securing and solidifying your position as the expert in your field.
That's a really interesting way to frame it, to think about it. I think as well that sometimes the price in itself, if something's more expensive, there is a preconceived idea that thing is going to be better. And there's also something that I've seen in the instance of like how, not dedicated, that's not the right word, how invested clients are with something. That a good example is coaching, that you could have two coaching programs. They could be exactly the same program. One of those programs is free or low cost, and the other one costs 10 grand. And who do you think is going to get the better results on that program?
Easily every time the person invests.
Yeah, for sure.
When you got skin in the game.
Skin in the game. That's the one. That's the phrase.
That's the one. That is exactly the type of client that you want, where it stings, where they're not going to let their investment go to waste. John, I've been running a creative agency for a good part of 15 years now. And as much as we love doing work on a pro bono basis for charities, registered charities when we can, they are by far not every single time, I need to put a caveat there, but the risk of that project derailing and being devalued is so much greater than the clients we work with that are willing to actually pay the money. So even though we might give the same level of value, our scope creep, extra revisions that come in, the delays for clients getting back to us, all of those things are much, much worse with our pro bono projects, the guys that we give work away to for free, simply because it's not valued. They don't have skin in the game. They might want it. It might be a nice to have, and they approach us and they might ask us, or we might offer it. But until somebody's willing to until it hurts to pay, and it should hurt to pay. If I'm talking about that eye surgeon, if I'm paying 10 grand and I have to remortgage my house, I'm going to do whatever that surgeon says to prepare for that surgery and do every single exercise afterwards to protect my investment. I'm going to work with and lean into the expertise of that consultant or that surgeon. It's exactly the same in the architecture industry, John.
So, Daniel, you talk about doubling profit without hiring or spending more money on marketing. This sounds too good to be true. Like, how is this even possible?
Oh, this is why we're here listening, isn't it? How do you double your profit without spending more money on marketing or hiring extra staff? Believe it or not, in the architecture industry, it's actually not that difficult. It sounds really far-fetched. It requires a few different things. It requires confidence and boldness. It requires courage. It requires you to also understand your value and not just compete on price like everybody else. It requires you to step in. Like in our program that you introduced, in our Masterplan program, we go through up to as many as 182 different points to maximize and optimize the profitability of an architecture firm specifically. 182 it's sitting at the moment.
Wow.
But John, what I could maybe do is we'll maybe have a look at 2 or 3 of the biggest hitters that you can apply and your listeners can apply straight away. There's 2 core areas in which you need to be able to double your profit. But before I reveal what they are, John, let's just take a look at what a typical scenario might be for let's say a small architecture firm. And you'll realize and recognize it's not as far-fetched as what the title might seem to suggest. There are companies that would be doing great to have a 10% increase. We're talking about 100% of profit increase, right? What I'm not talking about is doubling your revenue and your turnover. We're talking about doubling your profit. Ultimately, the take-home money. That extra money that's going to enable you to have more time. That extra money that's going to enable you to invest in the future of your business and put more money in your pocket, ultimately. If we take a scenario of a small firm that has maybe 3-4 people, perhaps. For the sake of keeping numbers round, let's say a firm is turning over £400,000. I think for a small firm with 2 or 3 people, that's probably in and around that space, maybe 3 or 4 people. Okay, 400 grand. Now, if we take the benchmark of gross profitability, so that is after everyone's salaries have been paid, after your overheads and your studio fees and your printing costs and everything else has been paid for, you are left with your gross profit. Now, the benchmark within the industry is between 6 and 15% within the architecture space, which is ludicrously low already. If you were to compare that with solicitors, for example, they are running at 50, 60% upwards, and yet architecture firms are 6 to 15%. But if we took this particular scenario, John, if turnover is 400 grand and we use 10% as an example, what might that firm's gross profit be for the year, John?
If my mathematics is correct, that would be about 40k.
You're spot on. Put you on the spot. So you're talking, 10 grand per quarter, £10,000 per quarter. Now, in order to double your profits, all we need to do is find an extra £10,000 of clean, clear profit per quarter. It's not far-fetched. That is very achievable. And we do it in 2 areas, John. One seems a bit more obvious than the other, but one key area is reducing spend. Right, there are many ways to reduce unnecessary spend to increase your profitability. And we've talked about a few of them already. I'll give you the top 2 or 3 here. And the first one, John, is one we've talked about already, which is understanding how to get around client friction and client delays. That scope creep, revision creep, all unpaid. How do you get over that? It starts by actually being able to identify who your dream client is and communicate and build your brand specifically for them. That's the long, hard way to go about doing it. But if you can master that, you will have a line of dream clients ready to work with you at a high value rate, and who will lean into your expertise and enable you the time to be creative. That's what we want, right? That's what we were sold in architecture school, is the Peter Zimther type he can pick any clients he wants because he's got so many people lining up to work with him, which is wonderful. But that starts with recognizing who you want to work with. If you're trying to please everybody, it just doesn't work. You cannot specifically position your business in a way that says we specialize in this type of client, not even a type of architecture, a type of person perhaps that you serve to exist, and you become exactly what they need. Otherwise, you got those delays, you got people who don't value you, you've got everything that we've just mentioned, John. And that's the long and hard way to do it, is build a brand for them. It's worth doing and worth starting right now. The short way to overcome that is to explicitly put better clauses in your contracts. Explicitly state how many revisions they're going to be. Anything above that comes at a cost. So at least your time is paid for and you're not doing it unpaid. Equally, if you put clauses in for response times as well, John. We expect our clients to respond to requests from the firm within 24, 48 hours. Anything beyond that risks the project being paused or cancelled. At which point, if they want to reopen the project, there's a reopening fee. And perhaps it's something like 10% additional cost of the project. So there's onus on the clients as well to get their heads in the game and respond so that you're not wasting time and thus, therefore, wasting money. So there's a couple of big ones there. Building a brand and better contracts. Two really, really good places to start. The third here is billable time. It's understanding your staff's capacity and capability and potential. Now, far too often, what I do see is architecture firms that are growing particularly, they might have even 10 or 12 architects. And that's what they have. They've got architectural assistants and architects, all who are trained to deliver projects. Who's delivering the financials and the operations and the administration? Who's doing the social media? Who's doing the marketing? It's all the people who are in the business who have the potential to have a very high billable rate. And if we just take the example of an architect doing some basic administration work or doing meetings for the sake of meetings, let's say their billable time is worth £100 per hour to the company, just for the sake of round numbers and arguments again. If 10 hours of their week is spent doing admin tasks for the business and social media and all those other things that are necessary to keep a business running, you as a principal or as a shareholder in the business are paying £100 an hour to have somebody doing photocopying and scheduling posts on social media.
It doesn't make sense, does it? That doesn't make
any sense. No, it doesn't. Not financially anyway. It would be far more profitable for your business to not necessarily go out of your way to hire an administrator, hire a marketeer, but to find ways to do fraction and to receive fractional support. You can have an administrator for 5 hours a week if you want. You could have a social media person working in your business or for your business 10 hours per month. And you don't have to pay and put them on payroll and have the liability of the staffing issue as well. And so by freeing up a lot of that administrative time, John, and it enables your team to take on more work, right? They're not doing any extra hours, but they can take on higher profitable work. And that's a little bit more tricky a game to play in terms of leading a team, but that can start with just you on your own. And you can grow that up to any size until you can build in departments that do those jobs for you. But it's about optimizing and maximizing that time. So that's what I would call reduction. So profit by reduction. Of course, there are many other ways, John. I've got a list of 182 ways.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all sort of 180 plus of those. But yeah, that's a really good tip. And it's that thing, isn't it, of using the resource that is of the right level of quality and the lowest overhead. So whether, that's a person within your team or somebody that's an outside team member that you bring in, as you say, could be on a fractional basis. And yeah, I could totally see how that could absolutely work. Absolutely, yeah. Have you got an interesting story about running your architecture practice? Have you done something different in your business that's been hugely successful? Or has a failure taught you an important lesson that you'd be willing to share? Then why not apply to be a guest on this podcast? Just click the link in the show notes to send us your details and get started today. And if you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Now, let's get back to the show.
I'll dive into our top 3-4 increase. Now that we've reduced our overhead and spend, we've got ways where we can add layers into the business to increase. John, this is probably one of the simplest things that we could do. not just as a principal, but as an architect working on a project. It's something that I see architects shying away from, but it's by far the easiest thing to do, John. It's to simply ask for referrals, ask for the sale. If every client who you work with and came through your door had a good experience, but for every client that did come through the door, if you asked them for 3 names of people that might be in the market within the next 6 months for an architectural project, you're going to start building warm leads a lot faster. And if you're a team of 4 or 5 and you're all doing that, then my goodness, you're not going to need to have to work very hard to build up that waiting list. And these are all people who are already pre-qualified because they know the person who's just had an amazing project with you. It is by far the easiest thing to do. Have an exit survey, have a handover on the handover date, even if it's before then, if the project's going from the beginning. Even I know of other creative agencies would say, if you're coming to work with us, great to have you on board. Just so that you're aware, as we go through this project, I'm going to start asking you to think of 2 or 3 people to refer to us, because we want to deliver an amazing project for you that it's going to be an easy ask. And by setting that expectation right at the beginning, it doesn't feel awkward. And it feels very bold to say so, but simply asking is an amazing way, and something that's completely free to do, and something we need to get better at doing as well.
I love that. That's such a good idea.
So I'll be asking you after this call, John, for 3 referrals, right?
Ask away, Daniel. Ask away.
Yeah, I think that's a tool from Pat Tracy. He's written about 100 books on sales. Learning how to sell better. It goes into that sort of money dirty category, I think, for a lot of architects, learning how to sell. But sales does not need to be sleazy. It can be a service that we're providing, and it's simply about being able to ask better questions and build rapport with an expectation that comes at the end of it. So great, that's the first one. I'll give you 2 more. One I'm going to gloss over very quickly, and that is to have a better pricing strategy. Now, John, I suppose this is a little bit of a plug, because in our Masterplan process, we spend a lot of time diving into pricing strategy. But understanding how to communicate value is immense. You do not need to be pricing based on the number of hours you think a project's going to take. And who says you have to do 5% of the construction cost either? I sat down with an architect, John, I'll give you a bit of a story. I sat down with an architect a few months ago, and we had a potential project on their hands. Now, this particular project, I'm going to change the scenario a little bit, but this particular project, let's say, was a £1 million build. And it was a developer that ultimately was going to go on and sell that property on to somebody else. Okay, so the architect comes in and says, okay, it's a £1 million build, right? Our fees are going to be, let's say, £20,000, which is 2%, or up to £50,000 maybe to deliver the whole project, up to 50,000, so £20,000 to £50,000. Here's the thing: every other non-architect, architectural technician, even contractors, builders who are putting in for the design work, they're going to be pitching in and around the same sort of money. So what makes you any different? This is a challenge, right? However, John, what we ended up talking about in terms of pricing strategy was not just looking at the numbers as arbitrary figures, but trying to understand the value that you can bring as an architect, as a brilliantly qualified architect who specializes perhaps in that particular type of project. What value do you bring? And so the conversation we were looking at was, let's say it was a £1 million project, and the aim was to sell that project on for £1.5 million, 1.5 million. So they were hoping to eventually make £500,000 profit. This is hypothetical right now, this particular example. We've got plenty of examples with our clients, but I'll use this one. What if you didn't just produce the building and the drawings that the contractor were expecting? What if you had a better understanding of the local area? What if you understood the the goals and ambition of the owners of the property, which was to make money. What if, therefore, you could rework the entire brief with that client in order to produce a building that could sell for 2.5 million, not 1.5 million? Now, a great architect would have that commercial capacity to increase the value of that project. And so by increasing the value of their project by an additional £1 million, John, I'll ask you the question, what is that worth to that client now?
It's worth a heck of a lot more than what they would have been paying, for sure.
It's worth £1 million extra to them.
Yeah, £1 million.
And so in that particular scenario, then what would be a fair fee for them to gain an additional £1 million than they would compared to the competition? That's what's up for debate.
It's anything between the difference of what they would have been paying and the extra money they're going to get. So potentially it could be a really generous fee.
Well, even if we use the scenario of 10% of the additional fee. So let's say it was 20 grand, which is what everybody else was putting in for. Now you're having a conversation that's worth 20 grand plus an additional 100 grand. That's 120 grand. Your profitability in that particular case just went up an additional 5-fold, went up 500%, because you were primed and positioned better to have a conversation that helped that client meet their goals. And it's fair. And there's not a huge amount of extra work, not an enormous amount of extra work that goes into it. You would have been delivering the project anyway. It's simply a case of understanding value. That's what we did for Phil recently, which was a client of ours who turned a 50 grand project into a 250 grand project. He did go up 5-fold by simply being able to have better conversations that align with the client's goals. And guess what, John? The client couldn't have been happier to sign that contract.
Yeah, I love that.
And they didn't need to add any more staff in order to fulfill it.
Yeah. So just by being able to better convey and communicate the value that you're already able to offer, that you are probably going to be delivering anyway, that you can make far much more money on those projects, make a much better profit margin than before.
And if you were doing that on every project, that's a very particularly massive win that would have been in that particular case. But if you were able to bring in that level of additional profitability, you could slow down the rate at which you have to pump things out and be more selective about the types of clients that you want to work with. And architecture and the quality of your work goes up as a result. And you end up building a better reputation than you could have done otherwise. So that upward cycle starts to fall into place.
I love that. Such a great example. Daniel, I was going to ask, where do you see typically the biggest profit leaks in architecture firms?
I mean, I suppose we've covered probably quite a few areas already, I think, in our conversation. If there were any other profit leaks, the biggest thing is going back to tendering systems, I think. There's going to be lots and lots of different ways companies can leak cash and leak profitability, but by staying in the rat run and the race, in the tender trap, then, you've got 20 companies competing against one, or competitions. There was a competition in Denmark a few years ago, 2017, I think, where there was something like well over 1,000 architecture firms competed for it. I still don't think they've delivered the project. Anyway,
it's crazy.
So there's something like £50 million worth of resource went into that. Who's paying for that? The architecture firms are. Whereas if you were positioned in a way that you are irresistible to your dream client, where they come lining up working for you, you can charge whatever you want or need to, that's a far better position to be in. And that comes at the cost of being more specific and being willing to say no to clients that are good, but they're not a great fit.
Yeah, that's it. There's a power in the use of the word no. Absolutely. About being more selective with the clients that you choose to work with. Daniel, did you want to share any other stories about a firm that you've worked with that has improve their profits?
I could give you lots of examples. Listen, John, a lot of it starts with understanding who your dream client is. And I haven't really even defined what I mean by that. I think a lot of people would think dream clients are people who are just willing to pay you and pay you on time. Absolutely not the case. It's people who you can bring a lot of transformation to, whether it's emotional or physical transformation. It's people who are highly profitable and brilliantly advocate for you and who are wonderful to work with. Working with an architect locally here, we recognised that a lot of their dream clients watch a particular type of television program. And so we started knocking on the doors of television production companies to see whether there's room in the market to start a new television series specifically geared towards that dream client of theirs. And when you can hit a massive audience of your dream clients and you're suited directly to that audience, then that's a win-win. I'm very hopeful that will go ahead. We've already met the producers. We met this last week for an hour and a half, I think it was, maybe 2 hours, through ideas, and it's going to be pitched within next week. So I'm very hopeful for that particular architect. So there's no one way to answer that question of how do you make an architecture firm more profitable, but there are ways that every firm can do. And so I used the example of Phil, who went from 50 grand to 250 grand in terms of profitability. With good strategy, we've seen other companies. There's another company that we work with who were selling, and these were high ticket items. So within the same kind of range of what an architecture firm might sell, they were selling 8 to 10 products in any given year. And that was enough to run a small business. We unlocked a strategy for them using some of the techniques that we're talking about today. And they went overnight from selling 8 to 10 a year to the very next year selling something like 85, 86
wow.
in that next year. And they became the number one retailer of that particular product in the UK simply by not working harder, but by figuring out how to get the right product in front of the right audience. And it takes you to be bold and brave. It takes you to know who you want to work for and how to build your brand around them. But when it works, there's other clients of ours, John, who again is a product-based company, got a 3-minute slot on QVC, the TV shopping channel. They sold out their entire warehouse in 3 minutes. And they were invited back again quite a number of times. And so that's great results when you get a number of these things aligned. But it's absolutely evident in the architecture space that there's so much money being left on the table, John.
For sure. Yeah. What would you say is one practical shift that we could make right now to improve profitability? You've already shared a number of examples. What would you say is probably the sort of quickest win for people?
The quickest win is to charge more. That's probably the quickest win. I can give you another strategy that I think will increase your opportunity for profitability. And that is when you are pitching and proposing to clients, anchor it against at least one other price. So if you've got a project in mind and you say this is a 5 grand project or a 50 grand project, give them 2 more options. Don't be putting 2 different designs in front of them or 3 different designs in front of them to choose from, but create 2 or 3 tiers in order to give your clients an option. There is it's built into every one of us, John, where if we're only given one price for a particular purchase, it doesn't matter what it is, it's absolutely natural to go knocking on a couple of other people's doors to see what we're up against. If you were buying a packet of sausages from your supermarket, you look at the price of your sausages and you compare it to at least 2 others on the shelf to make sure what you're buying is of good value, or at least is anchored well against what you're going for. If you want the most premium one on the shelf, and you'll have a look around to see what else is there, and you're going to pick the most expensive one, for example. If you are only providing one option for your clients, you are giving them license to go knocking on other firms' doors. That's more particularly suited for private arrangements, private contracts. If you provide them 3 options, number 1 is, this is what you've asked for. Number 2, this is what we think would actually be good for you in this case. And number 3 is all the bells and whistles. You'll find people will step up and choose that middle one more often than not. If you look at statistics, it'll be about 80% of people want to be in the middle category. And that gives them choice, and it gives them permission to make a buying decision. And so by psychologically giving them that space to do that within the frames of your firm, then they will make their decision with you, and they won't necessarily need to feel the need to go and shop around.
Yeah, I love that. I love that use of tiered pricing. It, as you say, it gives them options. It gives them autonomy to put them in the driving seat to make that decision. They don't feel like they're just backed into a corner working with you where there's just one way or the highway, that's it. And also the idea that you have something that's like a premium level service, that's such a great idea. You might have something, the top tier, you might hardly ever sell it. It might be something that's 5 to 10 times potentially the price of the other packages, but there will still be, usually there's still a minority, a small percentage of clients that will decide to choose that, which you wouldn't have had otherwise had you not presented that option to them. And it's just such a fantastic way of making your other options look really great value. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. Brilliant. What would you say though? What do you think is going to be the blocker for a lot of firms to make these changes? Because you shared so many great ideas today. What do you think is going to stop people actually doing it?
The risk of failure, I think, is what comes up a lot from the clients that we talk to. What if we try this and it doesn't work? What if we try this and we lose a client? What if they say no? It feels safe to stay put and to stay in the space that you're familiar with and that works. But my question to you, is it actually really working? 5, 10 to 15% profitability for professional firms, professional organizations is not great, good. It's just not great. You compare that to accountancy firms and solicitors and even non-professional agencies who are operating at a 50% profitability mark and above gross profit. This isn't good. There's no reason why architects cannot be highly valued and highly paid. Those two things are very possible. What's stopping people, from what I gather, and maybe your listeners can maybe comment if there's an opportunity to do that, let us know. What would stop you making a decision to take that chance on trying a few of the techniques and a few of the strategies that we've tried today? Phil, who I mentioned, who went from a 50 grand project to a 250 grand project, he was exceptionally reluctant to give it a go for fear that the client would say, no, this is ridiculous. What are you thinking about? And in that particular scenario, what I suggested to Phil was, okay, put your 250 grand option first in your presentation. That's the one that you talk about. Provide them the 2 other options that they could choose on the tail end of the presentation to anchor the value of that first one, which was significantly more expensive. And that's what he did. And the clients, as I said, were absolutely thrilled with that first option because he was able to communicate its value better. So, as any good entrepreneur knows, a good calculated risk can pay off. And just think what would happen if your profitability went up 2 times, if it doubled. What more could you do? What would that enable you to do? Get excited about it. It's possible. And as we set at the top end of this podcast, John, if you're just at 10% and you're 400 grand, you're only looking at an extra 10 grand per quarter. How many projects does that require a 10% uplift in price even? It's not a lot, but what could it enable you to do? Could it give you more time with your family to go hiking and traveling like how I would spend my time? Or could it enable you to invest more into the projects that you want to do? I think you've got to not just dream about the end product of the project, but dream about what your business could be like as well, and give it a go.
I love that. What would be the main thing that you want people to take away from our chat today?
It's doable. You can do it. And in fact, if anything, John, it's necessary for the industry. It's necessary to not devalue the creative industry. It's under a lot of scrutiny at the moment, really, and a lot of challenge at the moment with the likes of AI coming up the back and it's a lot easier for people to just punch something into an AI system and come up with ideas. And why do they need a creative genius like an architect to be involved? That needs to be protected. And in fact, creativity needs to be invested in and valued more now than ever before. But the gap is closing. The gap's closing from what somebody who had no experience was able to do to what an expert could do. That gap's closing. It's really important that you find your voice and communicate your value and charge what you're worth. And don't undervalue yourself and talk about money.
I love that. Was there anything else you wanted to add? We've covered an awful lot of ground today, a lot of value here. Was there anything else that we've missed that you wanted to mention?
Not specifically, John. Not specifically. I think if anyone wants to know, if you're happy for me to say this, John, if anybody would like to see what potential that they're leaving on the table, go to Masterplan.pro/profit gap. I've built a tool there specifically for you architects that you can go in, answer 5 simple questions. You might want to have a look at your books before you answer the questions. I'm not asking for then anything specific, but those 5 questions, by the end of those 5 questions, it will punch out a good estimate based on benchmarking in the industry, based on our experience of what's possible, what level of money you could be leaving on the table. And you might be surprised. Head over there, see what it comes up with, and the tool as well will give you some good tips on what areas to focus on first.
Thanks for sharing that, Daniel. That's going to be really useful for everybody for sure. And it's really quick and easy. I think there was only 5 questions that you needed to answer. So you can very quickly get some useful information from that. There was one other thing that I wanted to ask. I love to travel and to discover new places. I was just wondering if you might be able to share one of your favourite places and what you love about it.
Oh, John, I could talk to you about this for hours. When I was 18, John, I spent a year travelling. I hit 16 countries in that year. I've been to nearly 40 countries and been behind the scenes behind the curtain wall, as if it were, in a lot of countries, which is amazing. Life-changing, one of the most life-changing places I ever went to was India. And I went to India. I was there for about 6 weeks after spending about 3 months in the very affluent areas of the Middle East, which polar opposite in terms of culture and wealth, and quite amazing experiences. If you ever get a chance to visit either of those, it's absolutely worth it. It just blow your mind in terms of how big the world is and how different it can be in lots of different places. But gotta say, the one place that we keep going back to as a family over and over again is the Norwegian fjords. I love places like Geiranger Fjord, where we went kayaking in the fjords right up against 100-metre high gorges, essentially, cliff edges and waterfalls. And the world is an amazingly beautiful, wonderful place. If you ever get the chance to go to that part of Norway, do it.
That sounds amazing. I have been to India. I spent a couple of months there, probably about 20 years ago now. Amazing time visiting there. Again, we could talk a long while exchanging stories about that. I've been to Oslo, but I haven't been to any of the fjords. But I am a keen kayaker, so maybe that's somewhere that I should add to the bucket list.
Yeah, get up north there and on the west coast.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That sounds great. Daniel, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. Could you just remind everyone, where would be the best place to connect with you online?
John, it's an absolute pleasure. As I said, thank you so much for having me. If you want to connect with me, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So linkedin.com/in/brandingdan is how you'll find me. Equally, Masterplan.pro if you want to see what services are being and making available for architects, what free tools and resources are on there. There's lots on there for you as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, Daniel.
Thanks a million.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Architecture Business Club. If you liked this episode, think other people might enjoy it, or just want to show your support for the show, then please leave a 5-star review or rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It would mean so much to me, and it makes it easier for new listeners to discover the show. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss another episode. And if you'd like to connect with me online, you can do that on most social media platforms. Just search for @Mr. John Clayton. The best place to connect with me online is LinkedIn, and you can find a link to my profile in the show notes. Remember, running your architecture business doesn't have to be hard, and you don't need to do it alone. This is Architecture Business Club,